A young schoolteacher stepped out for a first date just before the Christmas holiday, and she never came back. When her family raised the alarm, police moved quickly. But what investigators uncovered as they pulled back the layers was so deeply disturbing that even those with years of experience found it hard to process. And when the full truth finally reached the public, it sent shockwaves through the entire nation. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life crime stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an important update. Comment below which country you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Your support keeps these cases alive and honors the victims. Let's start. Katie Locke came into the world in January 1992, growing up in a suburb just outside London. She was the youngest of three sisters with a notable gap in age separating her from the other two. After completing her schooling, she pursued higher education, studying history and politics at university. Upon graduating, she secured a position teaching at a Catholic school in London, a role that suited her in every possible way. The hours were long, and the pressure was real. But Katie had always felt drawn to working with young people, and she possessed something that couldn't be taught, an almost magnetic ability to connect with children almost immediately. That connection didn't end when the final bell rang. Outside the classroom, she was deeply involved in youth organizations for girls, including Girl Scouts, and her students genuinely knew, that if they were struggling with something, she was someone they could come to. When she did manage to carve out time for herself, Katie gravitated toward the water. Kayaking was her escape, her passion, and she took it seriously enough to earn her instructor's license. Occasionally, she passed that knowledge on, teaching others the sport she loved. Alongside all of that, charity work was woven into the fabric of who she was. In 2012, she volunteered during the London Olympics. She also made trips across the Atlantic to support children living in poverty in the United States. By 2015, at just 23 years old, Katie was still building her career, still dreaming about the future. She wanted a family someday. But between everything she gave to her students, her youth work, and her charity commitments, almost no room remained for a personal life. Katie wasn't looking for something casual. She wanted something real and lasting. She had reservations about online dating, but the reality of her schedule made it nearly impossible to meet people any other way. So, in early December, she found herself in contact with a 26-year-old man named Carl Langdell. He presented himself impressively on paper. He claimed to have completed law school, to have gained experience at several prominent firms, and to have spent close to a year working from Moscow before launching his own legal practice. He also kept a personal blog where he explored humanitarian themes and shared original poetry. On top of all of that, he was reportedly pursuing further legal qualifications. The two of them found a rhythm in conversation quickly, and after several weeks of exchanging messages, they decided it was time to meet face-to-face. Katie was still living at home with her parents at the time. Not wanting to trigger unnecessary concern, she didn't mention the date. Instead, she told them she was going out for the evening with a friend and took the train into London. The following morning, when she still hadn't returned, her parents grew alarmed. They tried reaching her by phone. No answer. They contacted the friend she'd claimed to be visiting, hoping perhaps Katie had simply stayed the night. But the friend told them a different story entirely. There had been no evening together. Katie had gone on a date. And since the night before, she had been completely unreachable. The friend revealed she had been trying to get through to Katie since early that morning. At one point, someone had actually picked up, but it wasn't Katie. It was a man's voice, barely above a whisper, repeating her name. Then came the sound of heavy, deliberate breathing, and then the line went dead. Shaken to the core, the friend disclosed everything she knew. Katie had arranged to meet a 26-year-old named Carl Langdell in a part of the city filled with bars and restaurants. When she first arrived, he wasn't there. He'd sent a message saying he was running behind. Katie had texted her friend expressing mild frustration, hinting she might just turn around and head home. But then Carl showed up. They went inside a bar together. A short while later, Katie sent one final message. The date was going well, she said. After that, silence. Every call and text went into the void. That was all Katie's parents needed to hear, whatever slim hope remained. Dissolved into something far more frightening. Word had already spread among Katie's circle that something wasn't right, and her friends mobilized immediately. Together, they tracked down Carl's social media presence, and Katie's parents sent him a direct message with one straightforward question. Where was their daughter? Carl replied that Katie had been with him into the early hours, but that she had climbed into a cab at some point, and he hadn't heard from her since. Her parents didn't know whether to believe him. He was the only thread they had to pull. Using what they could find online, they located his home address, and Katie's father drove there himself. When he arrived, he discovered Carl still lived with his parents. Carl's mother opened the door. She told him Carl hadn't come home the night before. He'd only walked back through the door sometime after midday, and at that very moment, he was out with the dog. Katie's father explained what was unfolding, and Carl's mother picked up her phone and called her son immediately, instructing him to come home. What happened next defied belief. Almost as soon as she reached him, Carl told his mother that he had killed Katie. He told her he was a monster. He told her not to waste her tears on him. And then, with his mother standing frozen in disbelief, he kept talking. He told her he had consumed a staggering amount of alcohol that night, and that he had strangled Katie to death. He had wrapped her body in a blanket, loaded it onto a luggage cart, wheeled it onto the grounds of a nearby hotel, and concealed it in some bushes. He had planned, he said, to tell his parents after Christmas. He didn't want to spoil the holiday. Before he ended the call, he told his mother where he was. A park bench, specific location included. Katie's parents dialed emergency services immediately, desperately, irrationally hoping this was somehow an elaborate and cruel lie, that their daughter might still be out there somewhere, alive. Police arrived at that park and found Carl exactly where he said he'd be, seated calmly on a bench, seemingly unbothered. Officers noticed immediately that his clothes were stained with blood and that his skin bore numerous scratches. As they placed him under arrest, Carl directed them to where Katie's body could be found. That information was relayed to colleagues across London, who rushed to the hotel grounds and discovered her exactly as described, wrapped in a blanket, hidden in the bushes. The medical examiner's findings were devastating. Katie had been strangled, and the defensive injuries covering her body made one thing unmistakably clear. She had fought back, and she had fought hard. Then came a detail that turned investigators' stomachs. Evidence showed that after Katie was already dead, Carl had subjected her body to a violent sexual assault. When he was brought in for formal questioning, a blood sample was taken. It came back showing alcohol alongside a combination of illicit drugs and prescription medication in his system. Despite having already confessed to his mother and personally guided officers to the scene, Carl said almost nothing during his first police interview. He sat across from detectives and refused to engage, offering no explanation, no remorse, just silence. So police began constructing the night from the outside in. One key piece came directly from Carl's mother. On that phone call, he hadn't only confessed, he'd also offered her a brief story of what he claimed had happened. According to Carl, Katie's death was an accident. He alleged she had consented to a sexual encounter involving extreme elements, including torture, and that she herself had guided his hand to her throat. But investigators rejected this story without hesitation. The injuries across Katie's body had been inflicted while she was still breathing. That was indisputable. And the assault had taken place after her death, which shattered any pretense that this had been some kind of tragic misadventure. Detectives methodically reconstructed the timeline using CCTV footage, cell phone location data, and testimony from witnesses. After meeting near a tube station, the pair went to a bar and stayed for hours. Staff and patrons who were present that night recalled Carl drinking heavily. Around 1:30 in the morning, Katie used her phone to book a taxi, with a destination set for a hotel roughly 40 kilometers away. Given the holiday traffic clogging the roads, the journey took close to 2 hours. Katie paid £65 for the ride on her card. During the trip, Carl became sick and vomited, leaving Katie responsible for an additional £80 cleaning charge. They arrived at the hotel at approximately 3:30 in the morning. Investigators later learned something unsettling about that hotel booking. Carl had reserved the room under his own name, shortly before he'd even left to meet Katie that evening. A hotel staff member recalled that, when they arrived, Carl was barely functional, staggering, unable to hold himself upright. Katie essentially steered him through the lobby and into the elevator to keep him from collapsing. Not long after going upstairs, Katie came back down to the front desk on her own. She requested 2 toothbrushes. She also arranged for 2 breakfasts to be brought up the following morning. And then, just after 9 a.m., Carl appeared at reception alone and used his bank card to push checkout back until 2 in the afternoon. When housekeeping eventually entered the room, they found the bed stripped of all its sheets and a damaged lock on the window. Police now had a rough shape of the evening, but the interior of that hotel room remained a mystery, so they turned their focus onto Carl himself. What they found dismantled his carefully constructed persona entirely. There was no law degree. There was no prestigious legal career. It had all been fabricated, but that was merely the surface. Digging deeper through police records and medical documentation, investigators discovered that Carl had been on authorities' radar for years. A 2009 arrest for assaulting a girlfriend, repeated hospitalizations over the years that followed, tied to severe and escalating mental health crises. By early 2015, he was living with a new girlfriend and her family, still actively receiving psychiatric treatment. During one exchange with a hospital nurse, Carl made a statement so alarming it had to be reported immediately. He told her he wanted to murder his girlfriend's sister, undress her, and sexually assault her. When the nurse escalated the matter, Carl threatened to kill her as well. Shortly afterward, Carl himself telephoned police to report that he felt an overwhelming urge to kill someone, and that he was standing directly outside his girlfriend's house at that moment. Officers arrested him and had him assessed by a psychiatric professional. During that evaluation, Carl admitted to a doctor that thoughts of murder thrilled him, that these urges stretched back to adolescence, and that over the years they had grown more intense, not less. A month later, he entered a guilty plea for threatening to kill his girlfriend's sister and was released on bail. He was hospitalized again shortly after. While institutionalized, he was relocated to a male-only ward. After it emerged, he had been engaging in sexual contact with female patients whose mental states may have left them unable to meaningfully consent. While still in that facility, Carl expressed a desire to kill his girlfriend's brother, but this disclosure was not pursued as a criminal matter. Part of what made the situation so dangerous was a fundamental failure of communication. Details about Carl's past behavior weren't being consistently transferred between hospitals and law enforcement departments. No single agency had the complete picture, so no single agency recognized just how extreme the pattern had become. At one point, while still a patient, Carl looked directly at hospital staff and told them plainly, when they let him go, he was going to kill someone, and they should write that down. He said this in mid-September, mere months before Katie died. Police investigated, but did not classify it as a criminal act. A medical panel concluded he had likely made the statement under the strain of an upcoming discharge hearing rather than out of genuine intent. Days later, Carl was released back into the care of his parents. On the 2nd of December, just weeks before Katie's murder, he received a 9-month suspended sentence for earlier threats made against 2 individuals. Additionally, the court mandated a full year of psychiatric supervision and a 15-day rehabilitation program. In mid-December, fewer than 2 weeks before Katie was killed, Carl was evaluated once more, and physicians determined he did not represent a threat to the wider public. But those physicians, like so many before them, were working without the complete picture of his behavior across multiple locations and jurisdictions. As a result, Carl remained free, with minimal real scrutiny, and as detectives would later discover, he had not been sitting idle during that time. A sweep of his online activity revealed he had been active across multiple dating platforms simultaneously, communicating with roughly 20 women at the same time Katie was killed. He had also been in regular contact with one particular woman for approximately 2 months. The day after Katie's murder, before his arrest, he called her and told her he had taken someone's life and would be going to prison. With the other women, it went well beyond messaging. He had been meeting them in person, following a strikingly consistent pattern. He selected the same area of the city each time. He took each woman to a bar. Before the date even took place, he would establish where she lived, then book a hotel nearby, making it feel natural to suggest continuing the evening there. He encouraged heavy drinking, drank heavily himself, and if a woman agreed to go to the hotel, that's where things progressed. Up until Katie, no one had been physically harmed, and to add yet another layer of horror, investigators found that he had another date scheduled for Christmas Eve, less than 24 hours after Katie was killed. Despite the sheer weight of evidence against him, Carl refused to confess fully and fought strenuously against any effort to access his phone. Then, in March 2016, roughly 3 months after the murder, he appeared in court and abruptly entered a guilty plea. But even standing there, he offered no story of what had actually happened. The phone remained a battleground. Sentencing hearings were delayed, then delayed again. Prosecutors were convinced that whatever Carl was protecting on that device was significant, and they were absolutely right. After sustained legal pressure, he eventually surrendered the passcode. What police found inside was among the most disturbing evidence in the entire case. Photographs Carl had taken of Katie's body after the assault. Only after the phone was cracked open did Carl offer anything approaching an explanation. He returned to the same version of events he had floated from the beginning, that her death was accidental, that she had been a willing participant in what he described as extreme sexual activity, that she had placed his hand on her throat herself. He acknowledged what came after her death. He acknowledged hiding her body. He acknowledged sitting down to eat breakfast and checking out of the hotel as though nothing whatsoever had occurred. Even his own defense team made no effort to frame this as a tragic accident because the physical evidence made that impossible. Prosecutors painted a far starker picture. Carl was a violent sadist who had spent years fantasizing about murder, and Katie became the woman he chose to act those fantasies out upon. In their story, she had responded to his drunken state with basic human decency, guiding him to the hotel, covering the costs of the journey, staying to ensure he was safe. But Carl was not only drunk. He was running on a volatile combination of alcohol, street drugs, and prescription medications simultaneously. And once they were alone behind that closed door, prosecutors contended he attacked her, killed her, and then violated her in ways the courtroom struggled to articulate. Ahead of sentencing, Carl was assessed by one of Britain's most respected forensic psychiatrists. The conclusion was unambiguous and chilling. Carl was a sustained and serious danger to women, and the prognosis for any meaningful change through treatment was essentially zero. Carl was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 26 years to be served before any parole consideration. His legal representative read aloud a letter in which Carl expressed remorse to Katie's family. Carl himself said nothing, but the story didn't end there. Katie's parents directed their grief not only at Carl, but at the institutions that had known about him and failed to act decisively enough. In their view, this wasn't simply the story of one dangerous man. It was the story of a system that kept crucial information locked in separate compartments, where one hospital didn't know what another hospital had documented, where one police force didn't know what another had recorded. They believed that if Carl's escalating history had been properly visible to every professional who assessed him, someone might have intervened before it was too late. A formal review was launched through the National Health Service. Independent investigators agreed on one point. The information sharing between agencies had been clearly inadequate, but they also concluded that even with perfect coordination, it would not have been possible to predict this specific act. In 2017, Carl added 3 more years to his sentence after assaulting a prison guard who declined to bring him cigarettes and tea. 7 years later, in 2024, that guard was awarded £600,000 in compensation. Then, in 2021, 6 years after Katie's death, Carl was found collapsed on the floor of his cell, lying in a pool of blood. He was transported to hospital, where he died. The investigation that followed determined he had been alone at the time. In that narrow sense, the story found its conclusion. But for Katie's parents, the deeper wound never healed. No sweeping reforms were made to the way medical institutions exchange information about dangerous patients. They have continued to speak out, to press for change, to insist that if the system had only assembled the pieces it already had, their daughter might have walked through the front door that Christmas morning and every morning after. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. Your time, your attention, and your continued support truly mean more than you know. In a world full of endless content, the fact that you choose to spend your time here genuinely matters. If you found value in this video, take a moment to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upcoming upload. Every like, every comment, and every share helps this channel grow and allows these important messages to reach more people. Thank you once again for being part of this strong and aware community. And most importantly, take care of yourself outside the screen. Stay aware of your surroundings, trust your instincts, and never ignore warning signs. Small precautions today can prevent serious consequences tomorrow. Talk to your loved ones, stay informed, and always prioritize your safety. Stay safe, stay alert, stay prepared, and I'll see you in the next video.